fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today we're going to be talking about another novel from Samuel R. Delany, and this time it's going to be Empire Star. I've already spoken previously about the novel Babel-17. I did that on Ira's channel, SF Words of Wonder. I'm going to go ahead and put a link down to that video in the description so you can get my full thoughts on this novel. Ira and I had a wonderful conversation about it. But we only read that Babel-17 for that discussion. And as I was reading through my copy of it, I learned that he had written a novella the same year that he wrote Babel-17 called Empire Star, and it was his hope that Empire Star would be included in a double with Babel-17. And unfortunately, that's not the way that it turned out. It was not included in a double with Babel-17 until 2001. So that kind of makes this the definitive copy in the sense that it is the copy that is done exactly the way that the author intended with these novella and this novel together. Having read both, I can now say that there are connections between the two. They're very tiny, but there are connections in that. The novel Empire Star is a novella in the universe of Babel-17, a sci-fi novella, and the writer exists in the universe of Babel-17 and talks about the plot of Empire Star in Babel-17. Of course, they have more thematic connections than that, but that is the direct connection between these two stories. So I will be talking a little bit about both novels, just because I have to talk about the themes and kind of how they match. But let's start with kind of my experience reading Empire Star. So after reading Babel-17, which was absolutely incredible, I really loved it. I cannot say enough how great of a novel this is, and we really broke it down in the video with Ira. I was very excited to read Empire Star, so I had to wait a few months before I started, but eventually I was able to start Empire Star, and I will admit I read about 20 pages and kind of put it away. And the reason that I put it away was because it was almost nonsense. And Babel-17 has a unique prose in that sometimes he starts talking about things that occur before he introduces them as things that occur. It's the only way I can really explain it. Like, suddenly people will be thrown across the room in the middle of a conversation and you'll have no idea why, and then two pages later you finally learn that another spaceship ran into them or something. And this is, of course, an incredible technique that allows things that are happening to the characters to translate to the reader in the same way that they would if they were happening to the reader themselves, right? If you were in a spaceship and not around windows and suddenly you were hit, all you'd know is you were thrown across the room. Anyway, Empire Star really felt like it was all over the place. I couldn't understand a thing. Now, I'm kind of used to this in sci-fi. Many new wave science fiction books that I pick up, there's this learning curve to reading them. It's the only way I can explain it, where you have to kind of read it for a bit, and then you start to realize, as more information is released through the world building of the novel, you can go back and go, oh, that's why it began like this. The examples I can think of off the top of my head is Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. There's a learning curve, right? And Empire Star was no different, but it was so wacky and so all over the place. And I don't know if I was not in the mood or what, but I was like, I can't handle this. So I put it aside and I waited about a week. And then I picked it back up, and it was incredible, and it was fun. And it was playing with the concept of narrative and how you tell a story and how a story will progress through time, and it was just a riot. It was so much fun. I really do highly recommend this novel, novella. In fact, I recommend that you should read it right after you're done with Babel-17. They go very, very well together. Okay, let's go over a bit of a synopsis. So our story revolves around a character named Comet Joe. And this story is about Comet Joe being given a quest, and his quest is to deliver a message, which they don't tell him what the message is, just deliver a message to Empire Star. And this is a coming of age novel, right? He starts as kind of a child or young man and grows into a man as this story progresses. And as he goes through his journey, he's introduced to an alien race named the Lee. I think I'm saying that correctly. And the Lee are these aliens that somehow they're considered builders, and they're not just architects, but they can build like cities, but they can also build ethics systems and really anything. It's wild. And they are impossible for people to understand. Not much is known about them, but they are enslaved by humanoid species to build cities and stuff. But there is a cosmic law, and this doesn't happen by any superpower of the Lee or anything like that, but they create what they call the Lee sadness. And whenever you walk near a Lee, then you are overcome with this sadness in your soul. And if you are an owner of a Lee, if a Lee is enslaved to you, the sadness is like times 100, and you feel it constantly. And this is such an interesting concept that we'll get into later. But as he goes, realizes that this message that he must deliver has something to do with freeing these Lee aliens from slavery. And he meets a lot of interesting people along the way. He meets a computer AI called Lump that is like a lump, but sometimes a box, sometimes a spaceship that he is inside of, sometimes a small thing that he can carry around. And this lump is it's the consciousness of a Lee was copied and put into this computer. He meets a woman that teaches him how to think multiplexly. He meets a jewel, it's an alien race called a Trivian, and they turn into jewels as time passes. And he's a multiplex thinker. And the jewel is actually the narrator of the novella. And because of his ability to think multiplexly, he's able to act as an omniscient narrator. This is really wild stuff. And just breaking down the plot isn't the best way to say, hey, go read this. The complexity of the loops and the narrative tricks that Delany plays with are what make this novel really enjoyable to read. And while there is a tiny bit of a learning curve right at the beginning, and what I mean by that is not that you have to get smarter as you read the novel. You have to learn to understand the specific prose of this writer. That's all I mean by learning curve is there's some writers that their prose doesn't read as smoothly right at first, purposefully, because they want to use world building to kind of retroactively have you understand the plot. And this is definitely one of those. Okay. We're going to leave it there. I will do a more deep reading a little bit later on, but for now, we're going to leave that as a spoiler-free plot review, and we will now go into a little bit of the publication history of this novel. So right away, when he wrote this, he wanted it published as a double with Babel-17. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out like that. Why it didn't turn out like that, I cannot find information on. But instead of being released with that, the first edition was released as a double with The Tree Lord of Imiten by Tom Purdom on the other side. I don't know anything about that story. I don't have a copy of that specific Ace double, unfortunately. But that's the first time that it was published in that Ace double. After that, it was often published with The Ballad of Beta 2, which was an earlier Delany novel. And this must have driven him nuts that they were making doubles of his work with this in it, but it wasn't Babel-17. I don't get it. I don't know why. I would love, if anybody has more information on why Delany didn't get his wish until 2001, please let me know, because that seems crazy. Delany was born and raised in Harlem, and I believe he has connections to the Harlem Renaissance. I think his uncle was a poet. I can't remember for sure. I'm sorry. And he's an interesting writer for me because I've heard such wonderful things about him, and I was very excited to read him. And then I suddenly started learning some really creepy things about him. Specifically, he wrote a book called Hog that extreme horror readers talk about, like, that is just this kind of, like, if you could think of the grossest book with all the grossest things happening, apparently that is the book Hog. It's not something I'll ever read. I do like horror a lot, and there's a lot to talk about where people draw the line on, like, how extreme they can take their horror. But yeah, for me, that is too extreme. I haven't read Richard Lehman yet, but from what I can tell, his stuff might be too extreme for me. I'll have to talk to Brian at Bad Taste Books and see what he says about Richard Lehman. So I was both kind of scared and excited to read Delany's work. And then Ira from SF Words of Wonder was like, hey, read Babel-17 with me, which I did, and I was very happy because it was absolutely incredible. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to read Empire Star, and that was also incredible. So far, Delany has been batting 2 out of 2 for me. I might try the Einstein intersection next. We'll see. If you like Delany, you can let me know where to go from there. I also know that the Speculative Reader has done a wonderful Delany video. If you're interested in knowing more about Delany, I'll put a link to this video down in the description. Go check out that video. It's incredible. Okay, with all that aside now, we can break into the meat of this discussion, which is the absolute insanity that is these two novels. Now, I've already spoken a lot about Babel-17 on Ira's channel, but just really quick, the best way I can describe this novel is that it is a Star Wars style action plot with an overlay of linguistic philosophy, which is absolutely incredible. There were parts in this that were making me think of Saussure's sign over signified, literary theory / linguistic theory stuff. And I think at the heart of the novel of Babel-17 is this concept that language, although incredible, although has given us society and technology and all this other stuff, is still not perfect in its ability to express something from one person to another. Now, we are able to express a lot, right? I can tell my daughter to go clean her room, and she will understand my words, my grunts and sounds that I make, and go clean her room. But when we truly try to understand another human being, there are pitfalls, right? The way that I usually try to explain it in classes is, if I say the word tree, we all know that the sound tree, the noise that I'm making, is connected to a specific type of plant. So, of course, we can all think, oh, okay, when they say tree, they mean something with a big, thick trunk and green leaves around it. But the specificity of the image of tree we see in our head differs. So if we close our eyes and think tree, all of us will get an image, a visual image in our head of a tree. And all of those visual images will be different. None of us will see the same tree. We might see close. Some will see deciduous trees. Some will see evergreens. Some will see trees that are very specific to something in their youth or something in the life that they pass now. And that tree image will be connected to an emotional response. So although we're both thinking of trees and thinking of different trees that are meaningful to us and having emotional responses, we are both thinking of trees. So language kind of half works. And I think what Delany is imagining in Babel-17 here is, what if there was a language that actually did allow for people to have complete and total understanding with each other? And it goes into, could there be the concept of individuality in a language like that? And his answer to that is no, there could be no I in a language where two people could understand each other. And we see a character, it's been a bit since I've read this, so hopefully I'm not messing this up. We see a character who is able to, it feels like, read people's minds, but she's not reading people's minds. She's able to understand language and body language so well that she's able to completely understand what people are going to do. And so these merge and become a language of two people actually understanding each other for real, right? In a way that it is impossible for us. I mean, that's why poetry and writing exists, is because it's people trying to express how they feel, and it's impossible to ever express it completely. It's an interesting concept. I've always loved this concept, and this is what Delany is talking about in Babel-17. Really interesting stuff. So Babel-17 is about the way that language changes our consciousness, right? So we are only, if we have a language that is limiting, like all of ours are, then we can never really express ourselves to anybody. But the more we learn of a language that would allow ourselves to truly express, the more our consciousness would change. That is kind of the philosophical theme, in my opinion, of Babel-17. Now, if we get to Empire Star, the philosophy changes. So, I've already talked a little bit about the plot of this story, which in the long run is enjoyable but not as important as the concepts in this story. In this story, we are introduced to the concept that there are three types of thinkers in this universe. And the three types of thinking are simplex, complex, and multiplex. And this isn't about intelligence. This isn't about who's smart and who's not smart. Simplex thinkers aren't stupider than multiplex thinkers. This is about a process of thinking, right? Simplex thinkers think in kind of one dimension. We could call it a straight line. Complex thinkers are able to think in more of a square, and multiplex thinkers are able to think in a cube. It allows them to see a situation from every side. And Delany is wondering, just like the knowledge of a language in which you can truly express yourself changes the way a person thinks and makes it seem like they have telepathy in Babel-17. In this one, the way you think allows your senses to show the world differently. For instance, multiplex thinkers are kind of existing in the omniscient point of view. So our character, when he becomes a multiplex thinker, is able to see the world from all these different points of views. Like literally, he sees himself in a third person from far back and is able to see behind him, in front of him, to the sides of him, everything. I think this is what makes Delany so brilliant as a science fiction writer and why he did so well. is that he takes on concepts and ideas that are they're very new wave. He's a very new wave science fiction writer, but they're very difficult to show or explain what's happening to these characters. So it all seems very psychedelic and hallucinogenic, but there is a concept at the core of it. And it's strange because I don't want to call this a time travel novel. This isn't a time travel novel, but it sets up kind of like a time travel novel in that it creates this narrative that is a loop. So much so that the characters are meeting themselves from different times. It's the best way I can explain this. And the words time travel are never used. It's really interesting how this is done. I just finished the TV show Dark, which was very, very complex show about time travel. If you've seen Dark, reading this story kind of felt like watching that show Dark, but without, it's not time travel that does it. It is multiplex thinking in the fourth dimension, thinking in a cube. I don't know. It's really wild. It really is very wild. And we get this constant loop. So the first time he meets this special character that's very important to everything, she's an old woman that helps him get on a spaceship to leave the planet he grew up on. The next time he meets her, she's a middle-aged woman who owns 7 of these these aliens, which is, of course, emotionally destroying for her, because the more Lee you own, the more the sadness of the Lee affects you. Not the sadness of the Lee themselves, but the government created this mandatory thing that happens where you feel sad. It's not the Lee that are doing it. It's this I don't know, it must be a machine or something. I don't know how they make people feel sad. And she teaches him how to think complexly. And then she has him go introduce himself to Lump, who is a computer, and the computer teaches him how to think multiplexly. And then with Lump, he meets himself as a poet. And it's interesting because I'm not 100% sure this is him. I feel like it really has to be him. I think it is him. But Delany also introduces the concept here of how writers can make us feel like they know us, right? That when writers explain themselves eloquently and beautifully, we are able to connect to that and feel like they're looking into us and are almost able to read our minds. So that's a wonderful part of the novel there. And he's worried about what the message is that he has to deliver to Empire Star, and then he's able to think multiplexly. Jewel, which was this, I think it's called a Trovian. Eventually, Lump has him poke out his eye and put the jewel in his eye, and they become kind of a symbiont life. And suddenly he realizes that the message that he has to deliver is that somebody's coming to free the Lee. And it turns out it's the woman that he met as an old lady and then as a middle-aged woman. And then he meets her when he is a little bit older and he's going on this adventure. He meets her, and she is a young woman just trying to get back to her home, which is Empire Star, because she wants to free the Lee. And he realizes that his mission all along was to prepare her to prepare him to prepare her to prepare him to create this loop and to keep that loop going. It's wild. So eventually, the end, I mean, they haven't even, he hasn't even got to Empire Star. And we get to the last 15 pages of the novella, and he's like, none of this really matters. She makes it there. There's a huge war. Civilizations are destroyed. She, of course, buys Lee's slaves to recreate the civilizations of her kingdom, which completely destroys her as a person, and because of the Lee sadness, and eventually she has to go to the planet Rice, I think, and work as the old woman that helps him through the gates to first start space traveling. And eventually Lump and Comet Joe and Jewel crash on the planet where we first meet Comet Joe at the beginning of the book. There's a crash, and a person says, I need you to deliver a message to Empire Star for me. So Comet Joe literally gives himself the first message of what he needs to do, and this loop continues, and we don't know how long the loop's gone on. We don't know how long the loop will go on, and the actual kick-ass adventure story that is going on in this novel is unimportant because of the loop. So you get the sense of the awesomeness of this story, but at the same time you get the sense of the insane loop that Thinking Multiplex has created. This is really fun, and I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend it with Babel-17. Delany was right. You should straight up read these two together. Okay, one last thing that I want to talk about is the Lee. I think that it is awesome that Delany wrote about slavery and created this concept of how would a society like us, how would a species that thinks like us try to find a way to make slavery slightly ethical? And that's ridiculous. You can't. It's impossible for slavery to be ethical. It is just always morally wrong, right? So what Delany did as kind of a metaphor for slavery is to talk about the fact that being a slave is absolutely awful and creates nothing but intense sadness and hatred and awfulness. And of course, the way that he shows that through metaphor is this alien species that makes the slaves broadcast this to whoever comes around them. But the real brilliance of this analogy or metaphor that Delany uses is that the owners of the slaves feel it the worst. That owning slaves is as painful, and I know that this is a complex statement. The people that own slaves are not going through the awfulness that slaves are, but the people that own slaves also are destroying their brains, right? That the ethical core of their being is being damaged for doing something as evil as slavery. So they have to feel the pain as well. I thought that was incredibly brilliant. It makes me think of these writers that talk about Southern belles, right? And how kind of strange that whole concept is of being, this is hard to explain, how messed up it would be to have to experience and see slavery every day, but make yourself okay with it. And of course, the way people did that is by rationalizing that some people were not as human as they are, which is completely fucked up, but it's what they did. So Delany has found a way to express this really wonderfully through metaphor. And that's another aspect of this novel that just is so incredible to see. Yeah, I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend you get the copy that has both the novel of Babel-17 and the novella Empire Star in it, and I say you should read both. A couple of interesting quotes I want to read through really quick. One of my favorites is near the beginning. This is on page 32 of Empire Star on my copy. You have undertaken an enterprise of great pith and moment, and I am sure someday somebody will set it down. If you don't improve your diction, you will lose your entire audience before page 40. I suggest you seriously apply yourself because you are in for quite an exciting time, and it would be rather sad if everyone abandoned you halfway through because of your atrocious grammar and pronunciation. This had me rolling because I read this right after I had given up on the novel. So I gave up for a while, and then I came back to it and reopened it, and here he was suddenly talking about in a very meta sort of way, like, you're going to lose your audience. And of course, his grammar's not atrocious, but it's very weird. It's very strange how he presents this story at first. So I think in a weird way, Delany was stating, I know that I could lose my audience by page 40. I know, I'm trying. And of course, as his character goes from simplex thinking to complex thinking, stuff starts to make more sense. And then when he makes the jump to multiplex, it goes all wacky. It's really, really fun. So I really loved that quote. Here's another one that I think connects to writing, and I think I've already talked about this a little bit. This is on page 59 of my copy. You will find during your reading, Joe, that certain authors seem to have discovered all the things you have discovered, done all you've done. There was one ancient science fiction writer, Theodore Sturgeon, who would break me up every time I read him. He seemed to have seen every flash of light on a window, every leaf shadow on a screen door that I have ever seen, done everything I have ever done, from playing the guitar to laying over for a couple of weeks on a boat in Aransas Pass, Texas. I don't know if I said that right, sorry. And he was supposedly writing fiction, and that 4,000 years ago. Then you learn that lots of other people find the same things in the same writer who have done none of the things you've done and seen none of the things you've seen. That's a rare sort of writer, but Naitai Lee is that sort. I have read many of your poems, Naitai. My appreciation, were I to express it, I'm sure, would only prove embarrassing. Yeah, that's how he kind of describes, instead of saying, oh, this is Comet Joe meeting himself, he's talking about this ability that writers have to make us feel like they've done all the things that we have done. Absolutely wild. I love that he was talking about Theodore Sturgeon. That was incredible. And it seems to be kind of a theme for me this week because Elizabeth Engstrom, who wrote When Darkness Loves Us, which I'm going to do a video about next, saved up money and joined a class that Theodore Sturgeon was running in Hawaii in order to workshop When Darkness Loves Us, and this second novella in this book. And Theodore Sturgeon saw it and read it and really championed her to publish it. So Theodore Sturgeon was obviously kind of beloved in the circles that he went in. Samuel R. Delany had a lot of wonderful things to say about him, and he also discovered Elizabeth Engstrom, which is some of the best horror that I've read in a while. So yeah, small world. I could reread this story 10 times and find more and more and more to talk about in this story. And I think that's what's really wonderful about it. I'm not going to do that because I want to move on to other stuff for the channel. But yeah, this is the first time I've done a deep read that I feel like I haven't exhausted all the information that I can suck out of the text. This one has a lot more. I've just scraped the surface of how deep this book really gets and the philosophy of this book. If you've read this and you love this, comment about it. Tell me about it. I really, really enjoyed it and would love to get everybody else's thoughts on it. All right, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching.